failure is part of the process. The thing that I always tell people is that if you were successful at everything you did, you probably didn't do as well as you could have or what you're capable of. So if you're successful at everything that you do, as soon as you face adversity, then you're going to stop. Versus if you fail a bunch but continue to persist through it, you're going to be able to go much further than you initially thought you would be able to go. A lot of times people are afraid to fail because then they think and they're more worried about what everybody else sees in them.
Today's guest is Mannie Canto, an engineer and professional STEM speaker. Welcome, Mannie.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm really excited for this conversation because I'm going to learn a thing or two. So I'm excited for that. It's always nice. So what is one of the most courageous things you have done?
I think for me, it was going back to school after failing out. So I actually failed out of school with a 0.7 GPA in college. And even before then, I know for example, like in middle school in sixth grade, I failed and had to repeat that. And then I actually had to go to summer school for seventh and eighth grade as well. So I had a lot of struggle in school and then even failing out of college and deciding to go back and give it another effort. I mean, I guess for me, that was a pretty courageous thing to do in my point of life, even though I kind of failed before.
That is courageous because, yeah, absolutely. So how was it when you got kicked out of school?
So I actually I was a big partier. So me and my roommate from college, he was my best friend from high school. So we had an apartment that everybody would just kind of show up at,
Mm-hmm.
and we would have random parties all the time. And it was actually a Friday, school semester was over, and I'm hanging out in my apartment, and I hear a knock on the door, and I think somebody's just coming over to party. I went and opened the door, and it was my father standing there. And he usually, I'm first generation American. My father's from Central America, and when you have immigrant parents, they tend to have a different personality and different expectation. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so he showed up and he just kind of was like, I was expecting him to yell at me, but at that point in time, he was just like, I don't know what you're doing up here, but I didn't raise you to do this. You're gonna have to figure this out on your own. And he took my car. He was helping me pay for rent for my apartment, and I just had to figure it out at that point in time. And it's very interesting when you have to get a dose of the real world for the first time,
Mm,
that you have a different appreciation for the things that you're going for.
absolutely. And it's the reality of it. You're sailing along smoothly, I can imagine, and then all of a sudden the rug's pulled out and, oh, what do I do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
'Cause,
much.
yeah, and that's where you had to work multiple jobs to survive. Tell me all about that.
Yeah, so my parents were actually, they were helping me pay for rent because they wanted me to focus on school, which I obviously wasn't. They were trying to help me out as much as possible, like with a car and all that. And when
Mm,
all that got taken away from me, it was actually the last month of my lease. So I was kicked out of my apartment and I had to figure out a place to live. So I actually wound up talking to the apartment complex and talked my way into getting a job just to have a place to live. But then I needed to figure out how to be able to survive on top of that. So I got another job in a stock room actually at Sears, and I also worked electronics at Best Buy. So I was working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, and I was like, that's not the job, the kind of life that I want."
yeah, I guess it was a quick and hard learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I've learned the most is when you're thrown into that kind of situation and you have
Mhm.
to learn how to adapt, you have to be able to figure things out quickly. And honestly, I'm most grateful for that experience, just
Mhm.
because if it wasn't for that big failure in my life, I wouldn't have been able to go on and accomplish any of the things that I did. And I'm also grateful for my dad because as a parent now, I see the courage on his side, because for
Mhm.
your kids to struggle, you want to do everything for them and to let them, have the courage to let them go on their own and figure it out. That was definitely a big thing on his part.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, yes, definitely. So, what took you on your journey of an engineer?
So I was always very curious about things. So even
Mhm.
though I wasn't very good at school, I always liked electronics. My dad was very
Hmm.
big into electronics, and of course, growing up, we didn't have a lot of money or anything like that, so he was always working, but he liked his electronics and had them around the house. And I would always take them apart and try to put them back together. The one thing I remember most specifically is we actually had a chessboard that was magnetic that would help move the pieces, and
Hmm.
it wasn't working. And I took it apart. I was able to get some of the pins together. I put it back together, and it worked and turned on. It was just like an amazing moment for me. And then a second later, it kind of exploded. And but even though that happened, like that idea of you fix something was kind of like a high for me, and I enjoyed
Mm.
that problem solving mentality, and that's what I kind of look for, is being able to solve problems, and that kind of drove me into wanting to do engineering to be able to solve problems in technology.
Wow. That's absolutely amazing, and absolutely, I'm like that as well. Because I failed at school, I didn't pass any exams. I went back at 35 because they didn't realize I was dyslexic. So I had to
Hmm.
face my biggest fears. And I love putting things apart. And I think maybe, it's something to do with my dyslexia. But I absolutely love it. I love to know how things work. And in fact, my children say, don't do it, don't pull it apart because you're never going to be able to put it back together. And sometimes I don't. Yeah, it's interesting. I like to know how things work. So yeah, that's really nice.
No, absolutely. Actually, I lead a team of engineers, and
Mm.
one of my sayings is, if you're not breaking anything, you're not trying. Just because you have to go through that process. And
Mm.
I mean, like, kind of with me with school and failure, I found
Mhm.
engineering is the same thing. Like, you have to be willing to take stuff apart and break it and not be able to put it together to really truly figure out the inner workings of it. But I found by doing that, you actually learn more about it through that process of failure than you do if you would have just left it alone and looked at it from the outside.
Absolutely. Wow, what a great way to look at that. Definitely. Yes. You're a professional STEM speaker, and tell me, what is STEM? Tell me all about that.
So STEM is the science, technology, engineering, and math. So it is those kind of competencies that involve a lot of like the scientific areas. You think about like for your biologies, your chemistries, which chemistry was actually went to school and started as a chemical engineer, and
Oh,
then I failed
wow.
chemistry twice. So I figured that wasn't a good path for me. So your science is kind of like that. Your technology with basic like IT, infrastructure, those kind of things. E is for engineering, and then
Mm.
the basis of all of that is also mathematics.
Wow. How amazing is that? I mean, half of that goes over my head, but it's brilliant. I can understand the value of it and what it's all about. Absolutely. So tell me more about your message. Failure isn't final, it's necessary because you do speaking around the world. So tell me all about that.
So it was, I guess, another thing for myself as a courageous standpoint is, as an engineer, I've worked on, in the defense industry. So we work on very high
Mm.
tech things like jets, missiles, sensors, those kind of things. And I always hid my past about
Mm.
me failing out of school because I didn't want to be seen as an incompetent engineer or somebody
Mhm.
who, oh, they could barely get through school. Why would I want them on my team? So I hid that a lot. And it wasn't until I actually was doing a career day, somebody asked me to come speak as an engineer. I was like, okay. So I went over there, and one of the kids was like, oh, being an engineer sounds fun, but I'm not smart enough for that.
Oh.
And I told him, and that's when I started kind of opening up about, well, I mean, I had struggles through school, through middle school, high school. I failed out of college.
Mm.
And the look on that kid's face when he was like, "Oh, okay, so I don't have to just be someone who knows or has A's in school to be able to do this. It's all about being inquisitive." And once that kind of happened for me, I started sharing and opening up my about my history more and more,
Mm.
both to students and also people at work. And I realized a lot of people go through some kind of failure, whether it's school, whether it's in their professional careers.
Mm.
They always experience some kind of failure, and everybody that I know has gone through that has been able to come out the other side learning more from it. And so that's why I mentioned, like, failure is part of the process. I know
Mm.
plenty of engineers who, as they're troubleshooting things, they break them, but then they learn so much more to provide the value from that point on, to where they're able to learn from that experience and share more than they ever would have, just by, being successful or knowing what to do.
Mm.
So that's been like the big part of me, is you learn so much more from your failures than you do successes.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that actually, if you sit down and actually take a look at that, nobody's perfect. We're all learning all the time. And from failing, obviously, there's learning to be had there.
Hmm.
Mm,
Absolutely. The thing that I always tell people is that if you were successful at everything you did, you probably didn't do as well as you could have or what you're capable of. So if you're
absolutely.
successful at everything that you do, as soon as you face adversity, then you're going to stop. Versus if you fail a bunch but continue to persist through it, you're going to be able to go much further than you initially thought you would be able to go.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. What do you believe is the biggest obstacle stopping people from unlocking their true potential?
I think it's mindset, honestly. A lot of
Mm,
times people are afraid to fail because then they think and they're more worried about what everybody else sees in them.
mm,
And if we would just be willing and kind of like your whole entire podcast is about courage. For me, one thing I've learned and I've started to think about is fear is just a lack of understanding. So
mm,
if you're afraid of something, that means you just don't understand the different things behind it. So I remember I was when I was young, I actually got bit by a dog, and I was terrified of dogs for the longest period of time. And it wasn't until that I understood like the dog, we went to go see if we wanted to buy a dog. The dog was just scared itself.
yeah.
And I went and I touched the dog and I went from behind and scared it. When I
Mm,
understood that, I was like, oh, the dog was also scared. Now I don't have a need to be fearful of it. I just need to understand the situation. And
mm,
when people are aware of you're going to go through this process and you're going to try, you're going to fail, but you're going to learn something from that. When you start understanding that process, you will be able to go much further than your initial, like, what you think your ceiling is.
mm. And it's so true, isn't it? We don't realize that, the animal could have been scared, the dog as well. And it's getting that understanding in whichever situation it is.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like you also, like, it wasn't until you understood you had dyslexia
Mm,
that you were able to start saying, okay, well, now I know how to approach this problem. You
mm.
understood it. And so you're able to go back and kind of get everything that you need to do for that process.
Absolutely. Because I just realized I just think differently.
Hmm.
And you got to meet the fact that, okay, so how can I do things differently? Is finding that way. And I bet you find that in your day-to-day work as well. Absolutely. Like you
Yeah,
say,
it's funny how you
mm,
you don't realize you need to learn how you learn.
mm,
In my process for school, I used to just remember like seeing movies, and I had that idea of, oh, you read your textbook, you listen in class, and you're supposed to understand it. And I would read the same page over and over again. I just wouldn't get it, and I realized that I'm a learn by doing person. Like you could show
mm.
me 100 times how to do something. It's not until I do it myself and make those mistakes that I'll actually learn. And so we all have different ways that we like to either see things, hear things, or do them that we need to make sure we tailor for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's by doing we do learn. I most certainly do. Yeah. And I'm the same as you, by I'm very visual as well. I like to watch things as well. But like give me a textbook, lots of text and I switch off instantly. It doesn't engage me.
Yeah.
And that's the half the battle, isn't it? Is engaging the person. So yeah, I can totally understand that.
Hmm.
So what would you say to someone who knows they're meant for more but feels stuck in fear or doubt?
For me, I mean, I've kind of done that a lot. Like, you have to understand what drives you and what motivates you. I like
Mm,
being challenged to be able to solve problems, but I also like being able to give back.
mm,
And I've loved the speaking and mentoring. And I was actually on a path of being like I was a program manager in my company. I was moving up, and that's when I kind of started discovering the speaking. And I knew that was more of my purpose of being able to go speak versus what the role as a program manager was. And so I had to make the decision to stop that career, kind of stop my career and go pursue this thing that I'm passionate about. And I
mm,
knew that it's not going to be as glamorous because there's going to be a lot of failures along the way because as a speaker, people don't know who you are. Like I'm not a celebrity or anything like that, so you have to let people know who you are. And once I share my story, people open up, but you
mm,
have to get in front of those people. And for me, it's I teach a different type of framework of how to kind of approach. And so for me, it's about I talk about asymmetric risk, and
Hmm.
so that's a way to be able to cap the downside and then have unlimited upside. So I think about like with homework, I would actually, when I was preparing for a test, I would take a set of homework problems and I would pretend like I was in that test environment and do it. And even if
Mm,
I did poorly, I learned that, okay, this is what I need to work on. And so they're quote unquote failing your homework or not knowing it. Like there's no downside to that. But I have unlimited upside of being able to learn and know what I'm going to be able to do for the test. So it's finding ways to be able to put yourself in situations to be able to practice that it won't completely destroy your career, and know that at some point everybody sucks at what they're doing. Like I'm sure the first time you interviewed somebody was a little bit different than now versus you have an experience. The first time somebody is like a surgeon, their first surgery compared to the 100th is completely different. So you have to realize that you just got to start. And along the
mm.
way, you're going to gain that experience, but you're not going to learn unless you go through those failures.
Absolutely. And it's so true. The more we do something, the better we get at it. And we can make it our own, to start with. It's kind of, okay, a set of rules and you try and follow them, or you kind of, then you make it your own and you get better and better and you can relax about it. Absolutely. I love that.
hmm
And tell me more about your speaking events and educating the students.
Yeah. So what I'll typically, my target audience usually I talk to either high school students or
Mm-hmm.
college students.
Mm-hmm.
And I will go through and I've kind of talk about just my past as an engineer and get them engaged and wanting to know about engineering. And then I like to talk to them about my story because a lot of times they're saying, "Yeah, you can do that, but not me." And once I share of, "Hey, if I went from a point 0.7 GPA to graduating with honors, you can go from where you are of just, you just only failed the test. You're going to be fine." And so I talk about this different kinds of framework. So I have one framework in particular that I teach is called like your next generation self. So how do you achieve that and be a better version of you going through failure? And so like the first thing I talk about is never leave the page blank. So
Mm-hmm.
I would be a terrible test taker. I wouldn't know, where to start. I would be that kind of person where I would show up to a test and I would look around and be like, wait, what subject is this? Like I would just forget. But then I was like, all right, well, let me just start with anything. And even if I had like for a math test, I would have the wrong equation. I would just write down whatever I could think of. But as you do that, if you do that and then just start working through, you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able, most of the time, you'll be able to get to the right answer. Like never leaving the page blank for me is you can get to the right answer starting with the wrong equation. But if you
Mm-hmm.
never start, you'll never get any answer. So I like to teach different types of things in my framework to help people work through that process of what it looks like to be kind of failing. Like, because
Mm-hmm.
that's for me, I feel like a failure when I show up to a test and I don't know. But if you accept that and say, all right, well, I'm just going to go through it and just keep trying, you'll eventually get to the right answer and keep working through it.
Absolutely. And I love your analogy there. And as long as, you don't leave the page blank, do something. And then once you start getting creative, and things will start coming out automatically. I love that.
hmm
Yeah. So tell me more about your work, because you talk about start fast, finish strong, achieving success, and you do quite a lot of different programs. Tell me about that.
So that came out actually. So I've one of the reasons why I always make sure people know that whenever my dad showed up and took my car, I had a 1999 Celica GT, and it was like my favorite car. And I had the kind of group of friends where we all had manual transmissions and we all drove and we all street raced. And so we actually had a group. It was called Goof, which stands for Get Out of First. So in like a
Mm-hmm.
manual transmission car, most people don't have them anymore, but you would have to, the faster you start, the more likely you are to win a race.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if like, and then when you're shifting through gears, if you screw up later on, the faster you start, you're able to actually keep that momentum and overcome those mistakes. So for me, once you start fast, it helps you just start going and you just start putting those processes in place. And even if you mess up along the way, you'll able to recover from that. So starting fast is important for me for everything. I tell students, we have projects that last like all semester long. And I always
Mm-hmm.
ask them, I was like, how many of you, the night the professor assigns the homework assignment, you go home and you start working on it right then and there? and none of them raised their hand. And I was like, how many of you wait for the professor to say at the end of the semester, remember, in 1 week, your assignment's due? And everybody's like, yep, that's me. That's how much stress does that cause you?
Mm,
If you would just start off fast, figure out where you have the problems, you're able to get through a lot further and you'd be able to do a lot better.
wow, I love it. I absolutely love that. It reminds me of me just procrastinate until the last minute. I have to do it.
hmm I mean, I
Oh,
have ADHD really badly, so I completely understand that process. But it's just like anything else. It's a muscle you have to practice of
mm,
getting going and going to make sure you get it done. And when
mm,
you start doing that, even if you don't do well, like just like we were talking about earlier, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
absolutely. If there was one key takeaway you want every listener to walk away with today, what would that be?
It's actually the last part of my framework. So the S of NGS is scale your fail. So a
Mm,
lot of times I tell people, what do you think you can accomplish? Whatever that is, double it. And then if you think you're kind of able to accomplish that, double it again. You want to have a goal that is 99% you're not going to hit it. But you need to make sure you have the habits in place, like it's guaranteed you're going to do that.
mm,
Because a lot of times we limit ourselves. There was an interesting thing that I heard one time about it was a riddle. It said, imagine you're driving in a thunderstorm and you get to a bus stop and it is pouring down rain. It's dangerous. And there's an old lady, your best friend who saved your life, and the love of your life that's sitting at the bus stop. Who do you let in the passenger seat of the car? And it's funny how many things it sparks in people. And they mentioned, of course, you let the old lady in the passenger seat, and then you give your best friend the keys to drive them, and then you sit there with the love of your life. A lot of times we put constraints on ourselves that don't exist.
mm.
We see a problem and we think there's only one way to solve it, and we don't think we can go beyond or outside that box. And so when you start scaling your fail and start pushing yourself further to beyond what you think you're capable of, even if you don't hit that, you're going to be much further along than what you think you can initially do.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love the analogy. Yeah, I have heard it before, but it's beautiful to hear it again and remind myself of it. Absolutely. That's so wonderful. Yes. Have you ever thought of writing a book, Manny?
uh, I'm glad you asked that question. I know we kind of have a conversation, but I'm actually in the middle of writing a book,
Mm,
and I'm trying to give myself a deadline to make sure it is out by August of 2025.
mm.
So I have a lot of work to do, and I want to make sure that I am being held accountable. So I'm going to have the book released in August of 2025.
Excellent. And can we get a glimpse of what the title is or not yet?
More than likely, it's kind of been my message the entire time that failure isn't final. Standing on success built from failure,
Mm,
because that's just been what my life has been and what my experiences have been. At everybody that I've talked to that's successful, they've had some kind of failure, and that's like my favorite question to ask people is, "What's your favorite failure?" Because a lot of times
mm,
people have something that they failed at that they learned a valuable lesson from, and they wouldn't have reached the success they had now without that failure.
mm. Absolutely. And I can assure you, I should be buying a copy of your book. Definitely. And when it does come out, we will add it into the show notes at a later date. So please do. I am anticipating my copy. Please do go ahead and get it. So, where can the listeners find you online? What's your website, Manny?
So it's my name, manniecanto.com. I spell it a
Mhm.
little bit different than some people. It's MANNIECANTO. I'm also Mannie Canto on all the socials. I'm usually most active on LinkedIn and Instagram.
And all the links will be in the show notes. So, do go ahead and connect with Manny. Thank you for sharing your insightful wisdom and knowledge with us today. And by doing so, I know you have helped so many others make a difference. I really want to acknowledge you for that, Manny Canto.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So we are all about Create the Courage to Be Fearless podcast here. What is your definition of courage?
Being willing to do it anyway, whether that is speaking out against a wrong, going in, something that you're afraid of and doing it anyway. So being willing to do it anyway, regardless of what it is.